Hi, my name is Bryce Butler, and this is my video for Game Engine 1, the graphics engine part, Milestone 2, formally. So these are 6 different shaders for this cube model. I have 3 other models. I'll get to those in a little bit. To quickly go over what each of these shaders are. On the upper left is the wireframe. Excuse me, the wireframe shader. The upper middle is color by position. The upper right is texture. The bottom left is constant color. The bottom middle is constant color with a point light. And the bottom right is a texture with a point light. So to keep this kind of visually interesting while I'm talking, I'm just going to move the camera around a little bit. I'll talk about the camera in a second. Each of these is a game object. Each game object has 3 major components to it. The first being the shader object, or in my engine they're called the render objects. So, like I just went over, these each have a different shader on them, which is associated with the specific render object. And then the game object also has a transform class, and the transform class handles the world matrix for that specific game object. So the transform class allows me to rotate or translate or scale models, game objects, however I want, and does all the calculations of the matrices behind the hood, under the hood, somewhere. And then the third major component of game objects is the update script, which handles updating the game object. So instead of deriving game object to basically change what the update function does, I have a list of update scripts that each game object goes through on the update call to do different things. So for example, all of these 6 objects are doing the same update script. They're doing the rotator script, which takes in a X, Y, and Z speed of rotation. And so the upper left is just spinning around the y-axis. The x and z rotation is 0. The upper middle is the x rotation. The upper right is the z rotation. Bottom left is xy. Bottom middle is yz, and the bottom right is xz. My update function doesn't pass the time, like the current time since the app started. Mine actually sends the delta since the last time update was called. This allows me to have smooth transitioning, no matter what the frame rate is. So it's always smoothly doing whatever it needs to do, or more smoothly, I guess, than just saying spin this amount no matter what. But yeah. Then, yes, I have a game object manager. Game objects register themselves into the manager. So whenever new is called, or whenever a game object is constructed, the constructor adds itself to the game object manager. And the game object manager is in charge of drawing and updating and deleting all game objects. It deletes them when the app closes. So yes, that is my snippet on game objects. Textures, I have a texture manager. I have a script right now on both of the textured objects to demonstrate swapping textures on the fly. So as you can see, this one, I can just swap the texture, give you a seizure. So yeah, I have a really nifty way of registering textures. So whenever the user of the engine has a new texture or that they want to add, they just go to this one function that's standalone in just a file, and they add one line of code, and then everything is hunky-dory, and it's done. And it's a really cool system that I really like, and we'll probably implement for other things like sound and models and whatnot at a later point. So swapping textures. So like I said, the game object has a list of update scripts. So this object that's flashing right now has a rotator script and also a texture swap. The lit one also has a texture swap. The constant color with a point light also has another script on it. It has changing the color of the point light to white, red, green, blue, white, red, green, blue, blah 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 blah. So yeah, just kind of hot loading things. So it's the power of my update scripts. My camera is derived from GameObject, so it has the ability to update, and it has the transform as well. So moving is just moving the GameObject transform, and the camera corrects itself based on that position. So the camera doesn't keep track of its own position. It just uses its transform position. So quickly, I'm going to go on to the next objects. They're just chilling out over here. These are my square-based pyramids. As you can see, these have a rotating script, but they also have an oscillator script. So each of these objects has the same amplitude, but different wavelengths. And so they're kind of fun to just bob up and down. So, yes. My models, I do have loading and saving models to a file. That is a thing that is done. Let's move on to these. These are my triangular prisms. Again, they're the same. I can swap things like anything else. And finally, I have these triangular-based pyramids over here. Again, swapping stuff. So those are my 4 models, 6 shaders, total 24 objects. So I have a second camera, and if I right-click, I set that camera as active, and this is over here to these triangular-based pyramids. So if I go to like triangular prisms, and if I left-click, I go back to my first one, back to the cubes, back to triangular prisms, back to the cubes. Excuse me. So, like I was saying earlier, camera derives from GameObject, so it's constantly calling its update script. And so my camera manager has the concept of an active camera. So that's the camera that's currently rendering. It's the one that's being used for shader computations. And actually the active camera is updating its update scripts. So the other camera that's kind of sitting over there isn't moving around as I move this camera around, which is super helpful for lots of reasons, namely the 2 biggest ones being performance and just I don't want this camera to move when I'm not using it, so that's a nice thing. And then what else? Oh, I can also zoom in and out. Zoom and zoom out. Okay, and then So yeah, and then I have a, also I wanted to point out that I am using index buffers to draw. I am index buffering all over the place. And then yeah, so that concludes my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. See you next quarter.